Welcome to Frequency. I'm Chuck Gose.
And I'm Jenni Field. Frequency is your go-to for real talk about comms, culture, and employee experience, beyond the buzzwords and straight to what matters. And today, we're getting stuck into some reports that have come out in the first quarter of the year. And there are 4 of them we're going to talk about today. So we have a white paper from the Institute of Internal Communication, IOIC, about the future of internal communications. We've got the Gallagher State of the Sector report. We've got the India report from Mike Klein and Ambuj Dixit. And we've got the Global State of Internal Communications report from Contact Monkey. It has been a lot of reading this week.
It has. And now, Jenni, we have now issued our first frequency limit of number of reports in one episode. But before we get to this tremendous amount of reports, there's one thing I wanted to talk about, Jenni, and it really shows the key differences in this talk about employees acting as advocates. I do not like to talk about it as employee advocacy because we've called it the wrong thing. So I'm just going to say employees acting as advocates. And there's these 2 really amazing polar examples that are out there. The Staples Baddie versus the McDonald's CEO. Jenni, do you know who the Staples Baddie is?
I do. It has reached its way across the pond.
It is, to me, the true magic of employees acting as advocates. Here's this employee who just simply took it upon themselves to begin showcasing all the things that you can do at Staples, whether it's printing posters or mugs or whatever it is. And it was so natural and organic, and it's probably not who Staples would have picked to be this sort of pseudo spokesperson, but it turns out the Staples Baddie is exactly who should have been advocating for Staples. What's interesting about this is, one, some of the notoriety that they've gotten. And I would love to know what conversations have happened inside Staples about this, because I'm sure there were some people that had to be talked down around saying like, oh, you can't do this. You're not the right person. We can't have a frontline employee telling these stories. There are probably some people that had to be talked down from that and basically get out of the way. So that's the Staples Baddie. Compare that to the CEO of McDonald's, who they used to launch a new sandwich, and it could not be weirder. I don't know that I've ever seen a person, period, let alone who works for a fast food business, who talks that way or talks about eating a sandwich that way. And it just comes off weird. I don't know, Jenni, did you watch this video of this?
Yeah. And it is weird. And do you know why I think it's weird is because it just doesn't feel genuine. Like, I think it feels really staged, and it feels like someone said, this is what you need to do and this is what you need to say, and it doesn't feel genuine. And I think that's why it makes us feel uncomfortable, because it doesn't have that. Whereas the Staples Baddie is so genuine. So that's why that you can connect with that, because from a human perspective, you can relate to it. It feels real. Like, I feel safe here. Like, that's all our brains really worry about. Whereas when it's doesn't feel quite right, we're a bit like, oh, it's just giving you the ick.
Now, let's talk about the backlash, though, to both of these. One, on the McDonald's CEO, there are now people doing parodies, mocking him for saying things like, well, I don't know how to pick up this big of a sandwich. Like, you pick up a sandwich. Like, it's not, and he's like convincing people that like, well, I'm going to eat this for lunch later, so don't, like, but I'm just going to take a big bite. I don't know. It's so weird. So that's the backlash to that. The interesting thing around the Staples Baddie, the backlash that I have seen, I haven't authenticated that these are actual Staples employees, but some of the videos I've seen where they're now complaining about how busy Staples is.
Oh, no.
That people they're like, I actually enjoyed my job. Like, there might have 1 or 2 customers in the store, and they were kind of, I don't know, appreciated the laziness of it. And they're like, now they're actually being bugged to work. And all these things that the Staples Baddie is telling people to come in and do, they're like, it takes a lot of work to do these. So I don't sympathize with that, but there's still backlash nonetheless from some audiences. So I just thought we've got these 2 really great examples of different people advocating for the business, and which ones are very authentic and genuine and which ones are clearly not. And I still can't believe that video of the McDonald's CEO cleared so many hurdles to get out. It's preponderous. Obviously, employees advocating for the business is to drive revenue, drive traffic, whatever.
Yeah.
Think of what the Staples Baddie did versus what this McDonald's CEO has done. And you would think based on the level of those employees, it would be different. So here's the lesson learned, like go where the authenticity is. Go to that frontline employee. That wins every time.
Right, let's get stuck into the report. So we're going to kick off with the IOIC's Future of Communication white paper. So they've published a substantial paper, which is making the case for internal communication as a strategic powerhouse in an increasingly turbulent world of work. So it covers the forces reshaping organizations, AI, geopolitics, the climate crisis, shifting workforce expectations, and it argues that internal comms is uniquely positioned to respond. It proposes some new specialist roles like a chief trust officer, a head of listening, head of culture and community, things like that, and a significant skills uplift across areas like behavioural science, scenario planning and data literacy. The ambition is really strong in this, and I've seen so many posts and articles on LinkedIn from consultants, mainly consultants, I think probably some practitioners, but consultants really applauding this report, talking about how it's really talking about the strategic direction for internal comms, that it's lifting it up and out of channels, and really saying how great it is from some of that side. That's where this gets a little bit uncomfortable for me, because there are two issues for me when I was reading the report. As I was reading through it, I scribble on my reports, and as I was reading it, I was writing, aren't these the kind of problems that belong in the boardroom? Now, I'm not saying that internal communication doesn't belong in the boardroom, but the conversations it's suggesting are the responsibility of internal communication feel like they aren't the responsibility of internal communication function. So I think there is that. The other thing is that the report talks a lot about communication that builds trust and connection, but it's written in a way that I felt practitioners would find quite hard to read. There was a lot of jargon in here. There were words like idiosyncratic. There were so many phrases that I was like, has AI kind of written this, or is this really how we're talking about stuff? Because this isn't plain English, and I think that's part of our job, is to make things clear, and that felt really uncomfortable for me. So my question for you, having read the report, because I've made you read them all, is do you think the role of internal comms can and should expand this much, or are we trying to enter into organisational design territory, and are we kind of straying maybe just too far out of our lane?
I do think there's a lot of room for growth. And here's where I want to come in. When you talk about that I see solving problems that belong in the boardroom, if there are problems that aren't being solved in the boardroom, that's not to say that communications can't help solve those problems before they get to the boardroom. That's where I like to see communicators as problem solvers. How can we use communication to solve challenges in the organization? When I read the report, there were a couple of things at the very beginning that stood out to me. One, it sort of leaned into the cliche of like, quote unquote, unprecedented challenges. I don't know, man. I feel like people during World War I, World War II, like I felt like not everything is unprecedented. I feel like we've gone through some of these things before. Maybe the circumstances and the facts are a bit different. So I think it's setting us up for like, well, this is just, we've never seen anything like this before. Well, I think we have in some regards. And then the other part too, where it said that there's this thing of people are thinking that AI will quote unquote think for us. I don't know that I've ever thought that AI would think for me. I've thought about AI as doing the work for me, but I never thought about it as AI thinking for us. So I think that was a bit odd for me, that it's taken this assumption around AI that I don't know that is really held. So yeah, not a lot I would say stood out to me. Some of the things were around like people drowning in executive requests. I don't know that that's one of those curses of, do you want to work with executives or do you not? Do you want a seat at the table or do you not? So if you have those and you're drowning in executive requests, is that what you asked for? And I think the part where you mentioned around some of these roles around like chief trust officer and some of these other things out there, those feel very temporary for me. Those feel like the kind of role that gets laid off pretty easily during budget cuts. So I don't want to lean into like titles too much, but I do think trust is one of those areas that comms can certainly help solve in organizations.
Yeah, so there's two other things that have thrown up for me, which I think have come from reading all the reports. But one of them is I remember when employee engagement roles started to come in, because I'm wise beyond my years, so I remember it. But I remember people talking about if we create a role for employee engagement, does that take away the responsibility of employee engagement from managers and everyone else that has a role to play? And I think that did happen a bit. And I think if you have things like a chief trust officer, they're the jobs of leaders. So I don't want to take that away from leaders. The other thing for me that I've come to after reading all of these, which I think I'm going to write about a bit, is there are so many problems in organisations that can be solved by communication. That's a whole part of my first book about influential internal communication, how you can streamline your communication to create an efficient and engaging organisation. That doesn't mean that all of those solutions are the job of the internal communication function. And I think that might be where I feel a little bit uncomfortable. I feel like we're compounding the two things of communication solves a lot of problem in organisations. That doesn't mean that the internal communication function is where those solutions need to sit. And I think that's where I'm starting to feel like there's a tension there that it's not quite sitting with me. But that, I think, has come from reading all of the reports, not just this one. But you gave me a little segue in to talk about that. So.
Well, I think that this other point I want to bring about, when you talk about this, like research as a whole, I don't think communicators need another document telling them to be strategic. I think they know that. What they need is the company to resource the function properly. Like that's really what they need. They don't need something telling them to be strategic. In fact, I think there are times where we let that driver of being strategic actually get in the way of getting the stuff done.
The next report I'm going to talk about is the Next IC Shift India report that's been published by Mike Klein and Ambuj Dixit. Now, they spent 6 weeks talking to around 60 practitioners, leaders and academics across 5 Indian cities, deliberately focusing on what's working rather than what's failing. Now, from what I can tell, and I'm going to share this now because I think this is important, Mike hasn't worked in India or with clients based there, and Ambuj has been a director of a comms agency for the last 10 years based in Mumbai. I think that's important because this is a report on a very specific market. And I think that we have to be mindful of our research and interpretation of things in specific markets and our experience in there. And I just want to be clear about that because I think that's important. The report is upfront about its limitations. So they talk really openly in there about the fact that they spoke to people who spoke English. So there was a very English speaking focus. They spoke to only 60 people and they kept talking about sort of the same sort of questions, but it was all very positive, which they do talk about. The things that come up for me when I was reading the report was what was the hypothesis? So almost to your point just now of internal communicators don't need another report telling them to be strategic. As I was reading all of these reports, I was like, to what end? Which is my favourite question. Like, what is this report trying to help us do? Because we research, we report, we repeat, we research, we report. I don't know what the end goal is. And I kind of felt that reading this report. I was like, I'm not sure what it is we're trying to prove here. I feel like it was trying to prove that there's a Western view of internal communication, and that's not necessarily the experience of other parts of the world. But if that is the report, and that's the premise of the report, there are 10 key observations in it. And as I was reading them, they felt really similar to all of the other insight we get from some of the global reports that we have. So in terms of the 10 key observations, I won't share them all, but they talked about leadership, communication, readiness, business literacy, channel effectiveness and structural constraints, the multi-generational workforce. These are the same things that are coming up in other reports. There's one piece in it that's different where they talk about leapfrogging, where the argument is that rather than following the evolutionary path that's seen elsewhere, starting with messaging, moving to engagement, slowly building towards strategic positioning, Indian IC could jump directly to positioning as decision support and coordination infrastructure. That's a direct quote from the report. But at the same time, the report highlights the challenge of leadership communication readiness. And it does talk about cultural norms where people hesitate to surface problems and challenge directions. So I'm not sure the leapfrogging would be possible if those cultural norms exist in terms of what they call a fear culture. So I'm not really sure what the message is here. I applaud any research and insight into a specific market. I'm just not sure what this is teaching us. There's one bit in it where it talks about a mention of a workshop that I think Mike and Ambuj hosted, which was on business case methodology, where they said they were teaching practitioners to calculate internal comms business value using basic financial arithmetic rather than requiring advanced statistical analysis. When I read that, I was like, share this. Like, if that's the bit that was really helpful, then share that, because that as an output, we know that the value piece is always a topic people want to talk about. I've researched and written about that over the last 6 months. But that premise of that workshop, that insight and how to do it, that's the stuff that's helpful. But for me, there was not enough in this to make me think, gosh, India is so different to the rest of the world. And actually, you know, we need to take stock of that difference. It made me just think, oh, this feels very much the same and insightful, you know, but it feels the same. So I suppose my question for you is, if the report is challenging whether Western IC practice is actually the gold standard, you know, do you think it is?
I wondered when we were going to get to a question. Don't you know, Jenni?
I had a lot to say about this.
You did. One, like you said, I like that looking at, I would say, like an underrepresented market when we look at past research when it comes to comms. It's not UK based or US based or something like that. So I think that it's good to do that investigative work. I think whether or not, like you said, having those conversations, those 60 conversations is good, but it's probably not necessarily fully representative of India as a whole. For whatever it's worth, I think calling out that saying anything is the gold standard is a risk. We have talked about the cultural differences in communications just between the UK and the US. So I think looking at the way cultures impact things like bureaucracy and decisions and those kinds of things would be equally interesting to see from this. I don't know that I get a lot out of it. I think your point around the leapfrogging would be interesting to know, but I think, again, that points back to the cultural side of things. Like we've talked about how, or I have maybe joked about how, like when I worked for a British-based company, they thought that making a decision after one meeting was like we were cowboys. Like, how can you just go and make a decision and do something? We have to meet to talk about meeting, to do another meeting, to get consensus. No, like, so I think there's these cultural differences that would be curious to see. And I don't know where India falls in that. So the leapfrogging is if the profession is relatively new there or less mature, not in a sense of like longevity at companies, what are they learning to not repeat the same mistakes that other people made? I think that's what I would like to see from the culture side and just the evolution of internal comms. What mistakes are they not making that we all made 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago?
Yeah, I love that. And I should also say, when I was reading the report, it does say, you know, like I said, they acknowledge the limitations. They talk about the fact that this is the starting point of a conversation, so they're open to feedback and challenge, and we've embraced that here today. And I would also say that if you're looking at the sort of cultural intelligence side of things, if you have an organisation that is globally based, then reading the book Cultural Intelligence by David Livermore would be brilliant. Talking to somebody like Sarah Black or Advita Patel, who are experts in cultural intelligence, would also be, you know, the place to go to kind of learn a bit more about that as well.
I think the other part too, where it talks about like 90% of the time executing, how do you then find the time for just business literacy? I think that's a challenge that is across all cultures. If you're too busy doing the work, when are you taking a step back to better understand and learn the business?
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's the challenge. Like you said, that's a challenge for everybody. Next is Gallagher's State of the Sector report, which they're calling this year the Employee Communications Report. So the state of the sector has been in our industry for a very long time, but now the Employee Communications Report. So this is from Gallagher. It is a global report. So 36% are from organisations under 500 employees. About 64% sit in larger businesses, including 20% in enterprises of 10,000 or more. Public health and NGO is the largest single sector in the report at 22%, but it's far from dominant. So the lens is quite broad here, but it's still very heavily North American and UK. Now, this year, the report is themed around the readiness gap, and this is the widening space between the risks organisations face and the capability of internal comms and HR teams to respond. Now, on the surface, this sounds very new, but in reality, it's not. So this gap has always existed. What's changed is the intensity. So the amount of change that we now see in organisations, the rising burnout that's happening, 81% cite it as a significant risk, as well as escalating volume. They've exposed structural weaknesses that were previously easier to mask. So this readiness gap is, for me, is a bit of a marketing term for something that's already been there. In the report, it talks about the fact that strategic ambition remains really high. So 73% want to operate as strategic partners, yet only 18% believe that they're there. Now, the report makes a very strong case that codified socialised strategy reduces risk and improves engagement, which is important for people that are really pushing for clarity and governance. This piece around risk seems to be a bit of a thread through multiple reports, actually, that we've looked at this year. So this sort of ambition, strategic ambition, the gap between that and actually where people are is kind of the core message of the theme. Once you get past all of the graphs and the buckets and the segments and all of that stuff in the report, what they're really saying is that maturity of the function is what's going to have the biggest impact. It's not about more channels. It's not about more content. It's not even about AI. The teams that are coping best with complexity aren't facing less change. In fact, they're probably facing more, but the difference is structural. So they've got a strategy that people understand and use. They have clear visibility of what they're accountable for. They have governance around their channels and AI. They have audience discipline, so segmentation, listening, manager enablement, and they are measuring outcomes, not just clicks. Now, all of that combination is what plays a role in these functions being better equipped to deal with some of that organisational risk. It reduces burnout, overload, the erosion of trust that's in the organisation. The report shows repeatedly that when strategy is socialised and active, engagement trends improve and this perceived risk goes away. So this stat of 73% want to be seen as strategic partners, only 18% are operating that way. This is what they're calling the readiness gap. Really, it's an operating model gap. And that's the bit that people need to kind of look at. There are a lot of teams we often talk about that are still functioning as this sort of broadcast hub, the sort of reactive service desk. That is nearly always because of structure, capacity, or lack of governance. So it's important to focus on that if you want to get to that 73% of being seen as a strategic partner. The report does also talk about change being a now core skill. I mean, to be honest, for me, it's always been a core skill, but now it's definitely a core skill. But the other thing that they're talking about is clarity. So it's important that if you want to be seen as this strategic partner, you're anchoring your function in the strategy, governance, and audience rigor. Because if you're not doing that and you're starting to use AI will just make you faster at being reactive. It won't help you deal with the challenges that you've got. The volume will just continue to erode trust, and that's not what we want. So we've got to do that work to really make a difference. Now, Chuck, this report is always a big report for the industry. Lots of people always talk about it. What were your sort of biggest takeaways from reading it? Because I'm sure you picked up on a few other bits than I did.
Man, for one, pour one out for the state of the sector. I didn't even know we were getting rid of that name. That's been a legacy thing in our industry for such a long time. But for me, and this for the report now formerly known as State of the Sector, it has always been this like, yes, but type situations. And I remember going back to very early on, it was communicators identified that managers were critical to the success of communications, but nobody was actually doing anything about it. And I don't know, what's a what's the plural of paradox? Is it paradox? Is it
Paradigm?
paradoxes? I don't know. There are multiple of those in this. Again, one of those is around change comms, which you talked about, Jenni. They rank it as the number one skill, but more than half have no formal change comms approach. So you recognize it's important, but again, not do anything about it. Another one was only 18% are satisfied with their ability to personalize content to audiences, which a report goes in and talks about how critical that is to the success of communication. But 70% do not regularly use personas or audience profiling. So we know it's important, but we're not doing it. So for me, if you're reading this report, use this as a time for some self-reflection or some team reflection. Because Jenni, you talked about this readiness portion of the report. It recognizes there's 4 different types of teams that are out there. There's vulnerable, untapped, resilient, and stable. And if you look at vulnerable and untapped, those are more than half of the respondents. So vulnerable teams are drowning. They're not tracking what they're accountable for. They don't have any visibility. Untapped teams have a false sense of security, low risk perception, but also low capability. Like, I don't think anybody wants to feel like they're a part of being vulnerable untapped teams, but yet half are. So what are we doing to become, even the resilient teams aren't necessarily, they're on the way to getting better. They're on the way to stronger. And then the stable teams, those are the ones that have cracked the code. They're strategic. They're tracking what they're responsible for. Like, how do we, those people that are in the vulnerable, untapped teams, how do you start to shift your way? That's what I want this self-reflection to do for these teams.
I think the other thing for me about this report, and I talked about the jargon that was used in the IOIC report, which I felt made it quite hard to really figure out what we're trying to talk about. This one for me, if I think about state of the sector when it started, and that used to belong to Gatehouse before they were acquired by Gallagher, it was such a useful report. And I'm not saying that the report is not useful now, but what I am saying is it doesn't feel as useful. So I was asking some people, like, what do you use these reports for? Because again, I was reading it thinking, what am I doing with this? Like, how is this helping me? What am I meant to be doing with it? And everybody came back and said, the people that I spoke to said, I use it to benchmark. Like, that's generally what I use it for. And I hate benchmarking because I think it's really dangerous in terms of you have your culture, you have your number of people, you have your industry. Like, it's so different. And I think that makes benchmarking very difficult. They've done a good job in this report of trying to break that down with sort of deskless and frontline workers and different industries. But I still feel like if I was working in an internal comms team today, what am I going to take from this report that I can really practically take away and do something with? And I think, to your point, it's that maybe that looking at that risk piece and where you sit in there, but also that capability gap and actually doing the work that's going to help you become strategic and making space for that. That's the takeaway. You almost don't need to read the report for that. You've got to make the time to do the work to enable you to be that strategic function. Otherwise, we're going to continue to research, report, repeat, and we're not going to see any change.
The other big takeaway for me was around, it talked a lot about volume and like how much content communication and comms teams are sending out there. And I want to go back to this audience thing around the segmentation and tone. And are you sending content or delivering content in ways that mean something to the audience? And one of the things they cited out was you can reduce information overload and burnout by just simply targeting content, by just simply giving people the information that they need in ways they can use it. Where we tend to see like information overload is like, oh, nope, dial it back. No, it's actually target it, personalize it for them. I think, again, it's what are these lessons that communicators and those who communicate can learn, that it's not just about stop doing something, it's how do we then do it better.
The final report, you'll be glad to know, is the Contact Monkey Global State of Internal Communications 2026. Now, this report comes at a very interesting time for the profession. I've talked about that a lot already this year, about the sort of crossroads we're at. The headline finding in this report is what they're calling the culture gap. So the distance between what organisations say they want from internal communications and what they've actually resourced that function to deliver. The data on team size tells a bit of a story. 67% of internal comms teams have 5 or fewer people. Nearly 1 in 5 operates as a single person function. And while 70% of organisations have a communication strategy in place, 54% say that they don't have the resources to deliver it. Now, that gap between intent and capability runs through the entire report and I think tracks to what we've talked about already today. On engagement, the picture is steady but stagnant. So most organisations are sitting at moderate. So employees are kind of coping rather than fully connecting. Leadership communication is earning reasonable confidence. 65% rate their leaders as transparent. But trust is conditional. Only 9% trust leadership messaging completely, 9%, while a third trust it only somewhat, rarely or not at all. Feedback collection is near universal at 95%, which when you read that, you think this is great, 95%. But the follow through is only about 15%. So 15% say their organisation clearly communicates actions taken as a result of feedback. 47% say it happens sometimes, 31% say it's inconsistent or delayed. I wonder why that trust gap exists. Employees are being asked to speak up, but obviously not seeing anything as a result. Now, there is some interesting insight around behaviour change in the report. 58% of respondents say internal communication campaigns only sometimes lead to visible changes in employee behaviour. Just 2% say always. Now, this report is really practical. So there's lots of practical implications you can look at as you go through here. It talks about clarity, consistency, credible follow through, all of these things to close the culture gap. Again, not volume. I'm not going to lie, when Chuck and I were talking about the reports, this was my favourite one that I read over the weekend, just because it felt the most practical and the most meaningful for practitioners. But my question really is that the report talks about leadership recognition of internal comms being at an all-time high, 82%, but that recognition isn't translating into that real influence or resources. So what do you think it's going to take to turn that around in terms of the we value comms message turning into something that's actually more meaningful?
I know you said you weren't going to lie, Jenni. I hope you've never lied on frequency.
This is true. I have not.
I hope that hasn't happened. The thing that stood out to me here was that 70% of companies that were surveyed have a comm strategy, but more than half don't have the resources to deliver the strategy. Why are you building a strategy that you can't deliver on? Like, I don't understand that. And maybe that's where the misvaluation comes into play here. Mm-hmm. Is if why go through the efforts if you should only put a strategy around something you can actively resource. The other thing I want to call out here, when it talks about that 1 in 5 of the respondents operate solo, I think people view this as a negative. And maybe this is going on a soapbox a little bit. I think there's a lot of power in being a solo internal communicator. Like you get to do this job. You are that conduit for leadership, for employees. Like, you are that role. I'm not saying it's an easy job to do, but being a part of a bigger team doesn't necessarily always mean it's easier. So I wouldn't view that as like, it's better to be a part of a big team or it's worse to be a solo communicator. Every unique situation is going to be different. As you know, Jenni, throughout Frequency, I love nothing more than holding leaders accountable for things. That when you shared that only 9% trust leadership messaging completely, I don't know if there's anything more damning than that. And then when a third only trust it, I don't know, where somewhat rarely or not at all, which to me kind of feels like the same, like you don't know if they're going to trust it or not. Mm-hmm. Man, that's the gap. That's the role. If the people that are leading your organization aren't trusted in what they say, like, comms isn't the solution to that. It's more, I guess, a symptom of like, how can you fix that? I don't have that answer. Like, you can't fix that with just better messaging. That is a credibility problem facing the business, with the lack of credibility with the most important audience in the business.
Yeah. And I think this is why I liked this report so much, because I felt like it had stuff I could take away. And and apply to my strategy. Like the trust gap is huge. So what can we do in comms to really address that and have really practical conversations on the back of it? Yes, that is part of the leadership role, but comms has such a huge role in that's so important to get right. So there was a lot in here that I just thought was really helpful. And I think thinking about your role and thinking about your strategy and actually what you can deliver is really important. To echo your point of being a team of one, I was often a team of one, but I ran my function like a consultancy. So I had people that were freelancers that would help with content, with projects, with graphic design. It was great because I was able to operate in that consultancy model. So that's always been how I've run things. It's how I run Redefining Communications today. And it gives you that flexibility and agility. So to your point, it's not a bad thing. It's just you need that structure and governance and all the stuff we've talked about today in order for that to really work and actually have an impact, I think.
And don't create a strategy that you don't have the resources to build on. And maybe this is where AI can help. One of the things they talked about was around AI adoption in this. And they were saying like that, I think it was like 80%, give or take, somewhere on there, are using AI tools mostly at like this drafting and summarizing stage, what they described as low value stuff. I don't think that's low value at all. I think that if you are a team of one or a team of few, that's actually quite valuable. And people have to start somewhere with using AI. And if that's where you start, then that's where you grow from. It's in the grand scheme of business. Yes, AI has been around for a long time, but it's accessible to people like communicators, HR leaders. Let's say it's been in the last 3 years. Only a few, of course, are going to be using this for things like strategy and insights, but they also started the drafting and summarizing in those areas too. So don't feel like you're behind. Just feel like you're growing. And if you're a team of one or a team of few, AI can help. This is where it can accelerate that work, even if it is just starting with that drafting stage.
But I think there's also a point here about that gap between creating a strategy and then your ability to deliver that, which I think if I look at the sort of the shaming around, you're only using AI for this, oh God, you're so behind. Like that's where people then go, oh God, let's put more in our strategy, but we can't actually deliver it. Do you see what I mean? Like I think there is this element of people, and not everybody's on LinkedIn and all of that, but if you're listening to all of that noise and you're not focusing your attention into the right places that align for you in terms of where you are or they're helpful for you, and you're just absorbing all of it, you're going to feel very quickly like you need to put all of these things into your strategy, which you're not going to be able to do. And I think that's really important. I think that is probably part of that challenge as well. That does finish our report. So I will never do 4 again in an episode, and I will take on board our rule now of 2 at a time. But what are you freaking out about this week?
I've been self-reflecting a bit on my screen usage and where I get the most value out of screens. And I'm in the sense that we have now, I think for the first time since I was 8, we do not have what I would describe as like a cable package, a TV package. As part of that resist and unsubscribe, we've canceled YouTube TV. So we don't have like what I would describe as like that TV package anymore. So I don't just watch random television anymore. What I've learned is that transition has now gone to like, I am learning from TikTok, which I don't think I would have ever thought of that as a learning source. It's absolutely an entertainment source. Nobody loves a good rescue dog video like me and my partner in my house. So that content is out there. But when I think about the ways that I am now learning from TikTok, especially around Claude and Claude Code and how to use those things, even learning about fitness and health. And yes, you have to get beyond the headlines. But I'm talking about try this new workout routine, or here's some good core exercises. It's amazing when I've thought about, yes, I'm absorbing it, but it's more like I'm actually learning from this. And I remember probably 2 or 3 years ago, TikTok ran a campaign that I thought was genius. This is before I was really even using TikTok, where the whole campaign was, oh, I watched it on TikTok, or I learned it from TikTok. I forget what the tagline was. That's now me. And it's from people who are doing the work. It's from the people like Staples Baddie It's the people that are out there doing it. Like, that's who I'm learning from. And it's been this interesting reflection of, one, where I'm spending my time, but also where am I learning the most.
Yeah, I like that. Like, it's just that evolution of that platform, isn't it, I suppose? And yeah, I mean, YouTube would have started very differently to, I think, where it is today. So my freak out is AI drawing robots. And that's because this morning I was at an event in London in the UK, which was for the launch of Hubworks, which is a new digital platform. I'll pop a link in the show notes for them because they were kind enough to invite me to their launch. But they had AI drawing robots. So you could stand in front of a screen, it took your photo, and then these little robot arms drew you as a sort of caricature of yourself. And for those that are watching us on YouTube, you can see my drawing of me. I don't think it's too bad, but some of them were questionable. But I just loved it. It was really cool. I'm going to look at it for some other events that I've got, but I just thought it was a good bit of fun. And there were loads of them sort of scattered about, and I just thought it was good fun. I've not seen those before.
So is this an example? Are caricature artists now going to be writing posts about how AI is coming for their job?
Yeah,
now, or we now?
Yeah. Caricature artists are now being replaced by robot arms. I mean, it's still technology that's evolving, but it was a nice bit of fun. And I think that seeing the joy on people's faces, watching it sort of draw their face and then seeing what it came out like, and sometimes the not so much joy about what it came out like, moved a nice conversation point. So it was good.
So I'm gonna take some of the fun away from it, which I'm glad you enjoyed it. I think this is that we talk about AI and its impact on comms or HR or leadership. It's that judgment factor.
Yeah.
Like, that's the role that we play. That AI robot drawing that is not judging the success, like your responses, whereas a caricature artist isn't going to do something that, like, you're going to be like, oh, that doesn't. Like,
yes.
They're going to know what's going to look good or not look good and how to accentuate certain things. Whereas, like, your AI robot friend there probably didn't as much.
No.
And so that's, it is fun. So I'm not completely like crapping on it. But I think it's that judgment factor of, like you said, the people that were kind of cringing watching it.
Some people were like, somebody said this has done nothing for my self-esteem, which really made me laugh. And she was like, yours looks great. And I was like, just because I've got a big mouth, that's like the only thing it's done is just given me massive teeth, which is what I would always get from a caricature. Anyway, thank you for joining us this week. All of the articles that have inspired this conversation are in the show notes, and don't forget to rate and review after you've listened. Subscribe so that you don't miss another episode, and pass this along to someone that you think would enjoy listening or watching, because you can also find us on YouTube. Thank you to Poet Ali for contributing the music to the show. We're back every Monday with more news, insights and opinions about everything comms and leadership in workplaces today. Keep tuning in and turning up.